Mhm.
All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be talking to Dr. Han today. She's a board certified clinical pharmacist, co-founder and co-CEO of Scene Nutrition. This is a life sciences startup that formulated the first calcium chew made from real foods for better bone health. So welcome, Dr. Han.
Thanks so much for having me, Anne. I'm super excited to talk to you and talk to your community, and hopefully we'll debunk some myths around calcium and really dive deep into supplements and dietary sources of calcium. So I'm excited to get the
Love
conversation
it.
going.
Yes, absolutely. This is exactly what my community wants to hear. And I met you a couple months ago actually at an osteoporosis symposium. And that's where I was really wowed by your product and knew I needed to bring this information to my community because they are asking those exact questions. There it is. Here it is. They want to know about calcium. There's so much confusion over what type should I be taking and how much should I be taking? So before we get into the questions, I do want to give a little bit more background on you.
Mhm.
So Dr. Han is a dual residency trained, board certified clinical pharmacist who specializes in obesity, diabetes, pain, and osteoporosis. She earned her BS and Doctor of Pharmacy from University of California, San Diego, and completed her postgrad residency training at Tufts Medical Center and advanced postgrad residency training with specialization in ambulatory care at the Veterans Affairs Health System in LA. After being diagnosed with premenopausal osteoporosis in 2020, she set out to revolutionize the calcium supplement industry by harnessing real food calcium to support stronger bones. So this is really interesting, and I can't wait for you to share your story with our community because when we think about osteoporosis, we think, well, this is just an older woman's disease, right? We don't think that this could touch younger people at all. But if we're not, one of the reasons, or many reasons, but if we're not reaching peak bone mass in those formative years, we may silently be suffering from osteopenia or osteoporosis and don't have any idea. So I would love it if you could give us a little bit more background. I know people would love to hear your story and
Yeah.
some of the problems you faced when you were diagnosed and the things that were important to you when developing this product.
Yes, yeah, I'm happy to share my story. It took a little bit for me to really own it and feel proud to share it and feel like I have a mission now. But when I was 29 years old and 2 months postpartum, I just had my first daughter. I
Mhm.
rolled off a yoga ball and started to have this really bad back pain. I didn't know what was causing it. I thought maybe it was from breastfeeding, from the I had a C-section, maybe it was from that. But
Right.
it was a pain that hurt even when I took like deep inhales. And so I knew that something was wrong. Um, I went to my doctor. Thankfully, I got in with various lab tests right away. I got an MRI, and they found that I had multiple spinal fractures in my vertebra. Um,
Wow.
and so that led to a whole bunch of consults to specialists and investigations because they're like, you are an otherwise healthy 29-year-old, like you were saying, and you don't look sick. You don't look like you should have
Right.
fractured your back. And because I am a health professional, I started to do my research on my own. I'm like, this is weird. What could be going on? And so I connected with an endocrinologist here at Columbia Medical Center in New York
Hmm.
who researches premenopausal osteoporosis.
Wow.
And we started talking, and she's like, it actually sounds like you have this rare condition called pregnancy lactation osteoporosis.
Wow.
It's a very rare condition. I don't want people to be alarmed,
Mhm.
but there's about 400, maybe 500 of us globally who fracture postpartum because of the strains in the skeleton when you're breastfeeding. And so I got diagnosed with this condition. I had no idea that I had, weak bones to begin with, but
Mhm.
it lit a light bulb in me because I'm like, I wasn't paying attention to bone health prior to this, but it really motivated me to start paying attention to it now.
Mhm.
Because what I learned is that osteoporosis is completely preventable and it's also treatable. And the earlier you know about your bone health, whether that be through a DEXA scan or a fracture risk assessment, whatever, the longer that you have to make a difference for your bone health. Bones are constantly remodeling. We'll go into this. They're building, breaking down. And so whatever you're doing today can make a difference to your bones tomorrow. And so that was the silver lining for me. Um,
Right.
I thought, oh my gosh, my life is over. I can't exercise anymore. Maybe I can't have more children. And I kind of was in a dark space for a little bit. But when I realized that I could make a difference and I started to feel strong again, I started to strength train and eat right. Um, 4 years later, my bone density in my spine is now in the normal range.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing. And I hope your story gives people so much hope.
I hope
No,
so.
and just having that knowledge, the fact that you did this deep dive and you sought out the right practitioners
Mhm.
to really support you and help you understand why and give you that education. And that's what we're here for today, is to give people the education so they can be as proactive as you are and you have been to really make a difference to at least stop the bone loss or reverse the bone loss. So
Mhm.
yes, we're on the same mission. We want to
Yeah.
bring more awareness and absolutely earlier testing, earlier testing. I talk about this
Yeah.
all the time. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, why don't we get into the actual ingredients, right? For
Mhm.
seeing, I'd love to know what they are and how they're sourced. When you and I spoke, I was very impressed with your sourcing and the thoughts that went into, or what you did in terms of sourcing the ingredients.
Yeah, yeah. Let me kind of lay the background a little bit. When I
Mhm.
was diagnosed with this osteoporosis, I knew the first thing that my endocrinologist did with me was do a calcium diet history. And we quickly found out that I wasn't eating enough calcium. I'm lactose intolerant. Um, I just don't eat a lot of dairy in my normal diet. And so there was a lot of reasons why I wasn't eating enough calcium and reaching that target amount per day. And so then I explored the supplement aisle to fill my gaps. And then I put on my clinical pharmacist hat, right?
Sure.
And I
Right.
was examining all the supplements, and I was really disappointed because all of these supplements are providing synthetic calcium in silo. They're not high quality, they don't get absorbed well. And so I found a
Mhm.
really big problem that I thought other women would be facing as well, which is how do we get our calcium from food in an easy, convenient, and high quality way. And so that's kind of the base of how Scene was born. Me and Adrian, my co-founder who lectures at Cornell in food studies, we put our heads together, the food and medicine piece, and thought, how can we formulate this? And so we have our calcium chew, which is patented. It only has four ingredients, which are organic dates, milk minerals, and milk protein,
Mhm.
almonds, and vitamin D from mushrooms. So these are all high quality food sources grown in the United States. So we're manufactured here as well, and they undergo rigorous testing. Although we're not a supplement, we do test all of our ingredients for nutritional values.
Mhm.
Make sure that each chew that you consume actually has 500 milligrams of dietary calcium and 400 international units of vitamin D. Um, and so you would think that that's a given, but not all supplement companies do this. It's not required. It's completely optional. And that's why you find that there's so many discrepant values, specifically among like gummies.
I was just going to say that gummies, you don't really know what you're getting. And for
Yeah.
women, this is so important to know. I am getting at least this amount of calcium every single day, and it's standardized. I think
Hmm.
that's a really important piece to highlight there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so we third party test for that.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where we're sitting in between food and medicine because we're not a classic supplement because we're not using any synthetic ingredients. we're using food to make something that provides accurate nutrition per dose.
Right.
Yeah, and all like a little to dive into our ingredients a little bit, our organic dates are grown in the Palm Valley Desert in California. Uh,
Mhm.
and then our milk minerals and milk protein, we source our milk protein from upstate New York here, from
Mhm.
a collaborative of 20 local dairy farms. All of our milk products are RBST free and non-GMO. That
Mhm.
was important for us because we want to use high quality milk. And then our vitamin D mushrooms are also organic. They're really cool because mushrooms can synthesize vitamin D on their own, similar to how we as humans can synthesize vitamin D from our skin. Um, and so
And
it's
that's
really
light,
fascinating.
right? Just light, does that do that? Synthesize you,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
similar to how like when sunlight hits our skin then converts it to the active vitamin D that we can use in our
Mm-hmm.
body.
Mm-hmm.
When the same sunlight hits the skin of mushrooms, they make vitamin D as well.
Right. Awesome. So, one of the things that you impressed me about the almonds too, talk about the almonds and the oils and how you wanted to make sure that the almonds in the chew didn't have the oils in them. So, tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
So we have, this is something we really pride ourselves in, is that we, as in me and Adrian, have investigated each of our ingredients really thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case for all supplement companies. They'll usually like just hire a third party company to then source their ingredients. No, we have spoken to each of our ingredient sourcers. Usually it's the farmers themselves. So we really wanted almonds that were roasted and unsalted
Mm-hmm.
without any oils because oils can contribute to rancidity of
Mm-hmm.
the almonds. And so we wanted it to be pure, just almonds. And that's really hard to find actually, because it's easier to make roasted almonds with some sort of like sunflower oil or something. So we eliminated that to just keep it the pure almonds and we dice that into our chew to provide crunch, but also almonds have the highest source of calcium among the nut family.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love the integrity that
Yeah.
went into this product here. And something you mentioned about the milk minerals. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know most people won't know what that is and how they are separated from milk. And is there heat involved in that? Does that affect the mineral as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The way that I think about milk minerals is imagine a glass of milk,
Mm-hmm.
right? Liquid milk. Imagine taking away all the water, the fat, and nearly all of the lactose. And what you're left with is, say, like this amount.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the minerals of the milk, and that's what we use. So those milk minerals are then, so it's filtered out of the milk and then it's dried.
Right.
And
Okay.
it does undergo a pasteurization step. So similar to the cheese making process, it undergoes a pasteurization step, which involves heat. But the key thing is that calcium is not an organic compound, it's a mineral. So
Mm-hmm.
because of that, it's not degraded in terms of nutritional value by heat. And so it retains the nutrition. And that's the theory behind it, but still we go one step further and then we third party test that milk minerals that are left over to make sure that it does have all that calcium that the original milk had, and it does. So that's a key thing that,
Interesting.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
confusing because vitamins, those are organic compounds, and so those can be degraded by heat. But since
Right.
calcium is a mineral, it doesn't get degraded by heat. And that's why when we consume cheese, which undergoes a heat step, we
Mm-hmm.
still get calcium. And so similarly, our milk minerals undergoes a heat step to make it safe to consume, but you're
Right.
still getting all the nutrition.
Wonderful. So to test study. So studies, I know people ask, have there been studies on the chews? But this is whole food. So
Mhm.
you can't really study whole food. So what do you look to that says, this is something that can really help to build stronger bones?
Yeah, so dairy is one of the most studied food groups
Mhm.
in diet culture and diet history. And so we have a lot of studies looking at dairy specifically, like milk and calcium, and thus bone loss or bone fracture prevention. There was this one large study that I like to refer back to because it's kind of like a meta-analysis, and it's looking at all of the studies that are looking specifically at calcium from milk, and then what does that do for our bones. And all of those studies had positive results, meaning the calcium and all the other minerals present in milk actually has a positive effect on bone loss and and specifically in postmenopausal women. And so these studies, it was interesting because they looked at calcium from milk, what did it do for bones, and then what did it do specifically for women that are 50 plus. And what they found is that the calcium that they consumed through their diet actually had a positive effect if those women were taking hormone therapy in the form of estrogen. They
Oh,
call,
interesting.
yeah, they call it this augmentation effect. So if they were receiving hormone therapy in the form of estrogen and they were meeting their calcium intake through food, the
Okay.
calcium from that food augmented the effect of estrogen.
Very interesting. This is good information. I know people
Yeah.
are going to enjoy hearing that little fact there. So, in terms of digestion and absorption, because this is the big piece, I think, when it comes to calcium and all of the supplements out there. And you mentioned, some of the ones that are most common, like the calcium citrate and the carbonate,
Mhm.
hydroxyapatite too. And that's a form that's commonly used. I wonder if you could speak to those forms a little bit and why the food form is so much better in terms of digestion and bioavailability. And then maybe even touch on the algae form too, because that's another question that comes up for so many people.
Yes, yeah. Okay, that's a big question. So so I think let's think of it in buckets. So we have the
Right,
synthetic calcium supplements, and then we have
right,
calcium from food or dietary calcium. Among the bucket of synthetic calcium supplements, you just mentioned there's calcium carbonate, calcium citrate. Those are the two most common.
right.
And then we have calcium hydroxyapatite, there's bone meal calcium, there's calcium lactate, calcium gluconate.
Mhm.
All of those fall in the synthetic calcium bucket.
Right.
Um, in general, those are thought to have reduced bioavailability compared to dietary calcium
Mhm.
because those are providing calcium in silo.
Right,
We know that dietary calcium is so effective because it's present with a lot of other nutrients, vitamins, other minerals, protein, um, that help the calcium be absorbed and used and directed into our bone. If you're just providing calcium in silo in the form of calcium carbonate or citrate,
Mhm.
that calcium is not as effective because it has trouble getting to its final destination, which is bones.
Right.
So I think of calcium moving through our body by kind of two main steps. And the first main step is that you're consuming calcium, and so it's in your gut. And then the calcium has to move to your blood and then to your bone.
Right.
There are certain vitamins and minerals that help calcium move along that process. For example, vitamin D really helps calcium absorption. So if we are low in vitamin D, then calcium is going to have a hard time moving from your gut to your blood. So that's why that just highlights one of the reasons why these other vitamins and minerals are so important in that process.
Right.
If you go to CVS, Target, Walgreens, wherever, and you pick up a calcium bottle, most of the time they're just providing calcium individually without these other minerals.
Right.
And so that's why we think that their bioavailability is a lot lower than dietary calcium. Our calcium chew is from milk, and so it naturally has all the minerals that are required for bone health in the ratios that are actually found in bone. That's the fascinating part, is that milk contains calcium plus the other minerals that are in the exact ratio found in bone.
That's amazing.
Just
Yeah.
in nature, that's what happens. And so we have calcium, we have magnesium, phosphorus, copper, iron, zinc. And then we add in the vitamin D because that's not naturally present in milk.
Right.
And so that cohesion really helps to use the calcium appropriately and for it to get into your bone where we want it. We don't want it hanging around in your blood or to
Right.
hang around in your gut, because if that happens, then you get the side effects of calcium, which is bloating, constipation. Some people have vomiting. It can be that serious. And those are the common side effects found with calcium carbonate.
Right, right. And I think what most people don't realize is that as we get older, we start to decrease our stomach acid. So
Yes.
that makes us even less able to digest, break it down, and absorb it. So
Mhm.
that's why I love, I'm always touting food first because we have nutrient synergy, right?
Yeah.
We've got nutrient synergy happening where we've got magnesium that's making the vitamin D active, that's making the calcium be better absorbed. So it's a beautiful
Mhm.
way if we can handle the casein in the chew, right? I mean, there are a few, that would be the only person that may not be able to tolerate the chew, right? Would be if you are sensitive to dairy.
Yeah, if you have a dairy allergy, you have
Mm,
to stay away from our chew, because if it's a true allergy, we use milk, and so you should not consume our chew.
right,
If you have a
right.
nut allergy, we have almonds, and so you shouldn't consume it. If you have a dairy intolerance, we've
Mm,
actually had several people say that they tolerate our chew just fine, because usually what the dairy intolerance comes from is, like you said, the casein.
mm,
We do have casein in our chew, but it's such a small amount that it may be fine. Because if casein comes from our milk protein that we add in, milk protein
right.
enhances calcium absorption. So that's why we have that in there. We have about 1 gram of milk protein per chew, which is a small amount, but it's the
Mhm,
right ratio for calcium absorption. But because of that, we do have a small amount of casein. And if you're very, very, very sensitive to it, then maybe it might not work for you. But we have had customers say, oh, usually I can't tolerate dairy in its classic form, like cheese or milk,
mhm,
and
mhm.
that has a lot of casein. And so that's why they can't tolerate those forms, but they can tolerate our chew. If you have lactose intolerance, like myself,
Mhm.
most of the lactose is removed from our chew. So you're actually consuming um, like less than 1 gram of lactose per chew. And so you should tolerate it just fine. And I tolerate it just fine.
Awesome. So it's possible if you have a sensitivity that you may still be able to take the chew, which would be great because it's so easy to take and they're
Yeah.
so delicious, I want to add too. Now, is there, if you could just briefly talk about, just briefly about the algae forms?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot about that
Yeah,
one.
just briefly. I know it's a big topic these
It
days.
is a big topic. And so, again, I like to think about things in buckets. So I hope that helps in terms of
Very
understanding.
good. Yes, absolutely.
Um, we just said the synthetic calcium, and then there's food calcium.
Right.
And then people say food calcium is natural calcium, right? The way that algae calcium is marketed is that it's natural calcium. But the question is it dietary calcium? Is it food? That's
Mm,
the big distinction, because if we're looking at AlgaeCal, which is the main form of calcium supplement
right, right.
algae on the market right now,
Mhm.
um, and we dived into this. We looked at what strain of algae are they using, because there's so many different strains.
Right.
And is that strain of algae regularly consumed as food? Like, does it have a diet culture history? And we
Mhm.
found that the algae that's used in AlgaeCal does not have any dietary history. And so while it does exist in nature, I'm not sure that we can actually say that it's a food, right?
Hmm.
We consume milk all the time, so we know that it's food. But just because it exists in nature is hard to make that leap that it
Right.
actually is dietary calcium.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how well that would be really absorbed and assimilated in the body too is
Hmm.
questionable. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about oxalates. This is a issue that comes up in my community, or they do speak into oxalates. Is
Hmm.
this a how much oxalate is in the chew, and what are your thoughts on the oxalates? And first,
Yeah.
just give a tiny brief description of what an oxalate is.
Yeah, so oxalates are naturally present in foods and they're most commonly found in plant foods. And they are fine. Unfortunately, they're called like nutrient inhibitors. Um,
Anti-nutrients, right? Hmm.
yeah, or anti-nutrients
Right.
in some circles. But they're just natural components of food. Oxalates are known to bind with calcium in the gut.
Hmm.
And so some people who consume high amounts of oxalates or maybe have some underlying condition get predisposed to form calcium oxalate kidney stones. In that case, what's recommended is to consume less calcium, but actually increase your dietary calcium amount because then that calcium that you consume from food is going to bind to the oxalates, preventing the stone from forming.
Sure. Okay.
That's a big misconception is that people are like, oh, I had a kidney stone, so I need to take or eat less calcium. It's actually the opposite.
Right.
Consume less oxalates, but increase your dietary calcium amount.
Got it. Got it. And I think when we think about the oxalate issue, people really focus on the food as being the big source, but it's actually a very small percentage of the oxalates in the body, as you mentioned, because this happens from we produce it endogenously if we have dysbiosis, if we have an overgrowth of yeast, or we have
Mhm.
a mold toxicity going on. That in and of itself can create more oxalates. So, and if we can't break them down, if we've got that dysbiosis going on, we can't break the oxalates down. So, I think we have to take it in context. And there's only a very small amount that's in the chew. So, just
Yes,
want to
yeah.
let people, to just understand that there's bigger stuff going on in the body, probably
Mhm.
that's causing an oxalate issue if that's what you have. But and even with that said, we don't want to be, you know, piling in the chia seeds and the spinach and the everything else. I think we have to look at everything in context when we're talking about oxalates.
Very, very, yeah, I agree 100%. We have to look at it in context and we have to look at your diet more globally. So
Right.
in clinical practice, the only few cases where we actually had issues with oxalates from food was when these patients decided to try an extreme diet. So
Right.
once they decided an extreme diet, then we saw a huge discrepancy between oxalate consumption and calcium, and that's when we had to really intervene and dive deep into their diet and see, okay, we need to fine tune this and maybe increase this. But for the general population who consumes a balanced diet or tries to, I know it's hard, uh, oxalates should not be an issue for calcium absorption. So we did do this calculation though. We looked at, okay, based on the almonds that we have in our chew, how much oxalates are in each chew? So we found that there's 1.2 milligrams of oxalate per chew.
Mm-hmm.
Put that in a frame of reference, that's very small.
Is.
Even if you've had a kidney stone before,
Mm-hmm.
that's small among the amount that you can consume in a day. And then if we want to go further than that, there's been studies that show that depending on where your oxalate source is and where your calcium source is, they may not interact. So there's been one study specifically that I like because it's so applicable to our chew, is that they looked at the oxalates from spinach and
Right.
then the oxalates in milk. And they had these test subjects consume them together. And they looked at does it affect calcium absorption or not? And what they found is that it does not. They
Wow.
they theorize that because it depends on where, like I said, where the oxalates are
Yeah.
coming from and where the calcium is coming from. In another study where they looked at oxalates from spinach and calcium carbonate, they did find an interaction and a decrease in absorption from that calcium.
Okay.
So again, it kind of leads to that theory that there's other things present in milk that can maybe counteract or maybe
Right.
help with
Offset it somehow.
calcium
Hmm.
absorption.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So just a couple practical questions before we wrap up.
Yeah.
How many chews do we eat? And is there a best time of day to eat them?
Yeah. So we recommend one chew a day
Hmm.
because we looked at population health data. It's probably less, but we looked at population health data and we found that the average American woman consumes about 830 milligrams of calcium a day. And
Okay.
so if you have one of our chews, it gets you right to where you need to be. But there are times where you're super busy or you're traveling or you're just not consuming enough calcium in your diet. And so you can have two a day, but we just recommend that you separate it by at least 3 hours to
Sure.
maximize your absorption. Because calcium is known to be best absorbed in small doses, and that dose is 500 milligrams.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And so do you give this to children, pregnant women? I imagine you would recommend them for pregnancy as well. Is there pretty much every population? How would you or not recommend this for children?
It's actually safe for children. Again, if they can consume dairy safely and nuts safely and they can chew, they they can consume it. I have a 4-year-old toddler and she does not like to drink milk, which kills me. And so I give her a chew and she likes to eat it. And I know that she's getting
Getting what
calcium from
she
food.
needs. That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. All right. And then the cost. I know that you've got several options. I love these. If you get them in the packages, you can get them for less than $1 a day. I mean, this is amazing. So, and
Yeah.
you've got them on your website. I will put the link to your website. And I also have a link for a discount. So
Mhm.
that will be included underneath this talk here as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think that we didn't talk about that you'd like to mention before we close? Anything
I
else important that we want people to know about?
I think we covered a lot of
Did.
information.
We did.
Um, yeah, I think if you find that anyone is curious about diving into the various forms of calcium, I'm
Mhm.
happy to come back and then we could like do that
Go
specifically.
deeper. Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Wonderful. Yeah.
yeah, but other
We'll have
than
you back.
that, please try out our chews, give us a review, use Anne's link. And we do have a 1 month and a 3 month option, like one time 1 month and then a one time 3 month. We also have subscription options.
Right.
Right now we're sold out on our 3 month, but we hope to be back in stock very shortly for that. And so, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly or through Anne.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your brilliance with us today. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.